Okay, could everybody please get seated? I think we're getting close to getting started here. Our candidates are all seated. Good morning. Thank you all for coming today. It's a nice turnout for such a dreary morning, but I really appreciate everybody coming in. I think we're still seating a little bit here. Okay. Well, again, welcome. My name is Susan Rosenberg. I am the president of the Richfield League of Women Voters, and we welcome you here. There are several members here, and we're really happy to have you here. I just want to thank a couple of the league members, Maureen Skaya and Sue Sandal. They're responsible for getting all this organized. This is not a small job to organize all of this. So it took work, and Maureen and Sue worked hard. I really appreciate it. I really want to thank the candidates. They are it takes some time to be here. We really appreciate you being here to share your views, share your issues. And this is a really important part of who we are as League of Women Voters. And I see Mary Supple here, who is the city council candidate. I know Maria Reagan Gonzalez will also. They do not have opponents, so they will not be a part of this today. Generally, we would have city council candidates also. But I have asked Mary Supple if she would stay after the debate so that if in case any of you Richfield residents have any questions for her, she will be available to talk to you or answer any of your questions that you might have for her. And Maria, I'm sure when she comes in, she would be willing to do the same thing. Anyway, again, thank you for being here. So I just want to talk a little bit about the League of Women Voters. It is our mission to promote citizen involvement in government. We are totally nonpartisan, and we don't support any one candidate. We believe that an informed citizenry is the foundation of the effective government. And it's, as I said, it's nonpartisan, but we do study all the issues, and we do take positions on issues, not on candidates. Now I've got to read you the rules, and it's a little dry, so bear with me. This forum is not a debate. Candidates will take turns answering questions. And that's, first of all, those prepared by the league themselves, and then also we're going to be asking for questions from the audience. And I know Nancy Lindberg is here. She'll be passing out note cards, so as you hear some of the answers to some of the questions that are being asked, if you want some follow-up or if you have something that you have, just hold your hand up, and Nancy will come and give you a 3x5 note card so you can write that down. This forum is being taped for rebroadcast on cable TV, so we ask that you be quiet and as possible, and not to applause until the very end. And we really don't allow for any outbursts or any applause, and if this happens, we will ask you to leave. I'm asking also that no photos be taken during the debate, and or any recordings being done. And please turn off your phone. If you would like to have a picture of the candidate, you can ask for their permission after the forum is over with, and with their permission, you can take their picture. The order of speaking will be determined by drawing numbers. Have you done that, Donna? Has the numbers been drawn? Okay. Donna Drummond will be the one who will be asking the questions. She's a league member, and she will be assisted by Sue Sandal, sitting over there. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make their introductory remarks, and the league questions will be answered in 1 minute. The candidates will have 1 minute to answer all the audience questions, and then they'll have 1 minute to answer for their closing statement. And there is a timekeeper right here in front, Karen Jensen and Jeanette Lostrom. They will be keeping really close tabs on you. And so when you see that stop sign, that means it's over. Members of the audience, again, you are invited to submit questions, and the league reserves the right to screen those questions. And so there are going to be some people who will be auditing those, and the questions that will not be asked if they're eligible, on personal matters unrelated to the elective position, if they are unclear, inappropriately hostile, or submitted for making a statement rather than gaining information. Questions on one issue will be judged as similar, and the league reserves the right to make the decision of just asking one of those questions if there's several that come in the same. And all of these questions will remain the property of the League of Women Voters. And if you think that maybe you didn't get your question adequately addressed, you can directly ask the candidate after the forum, and I'm asking for all four of you if you would stay for a little while afterwards. There are obviously no campaigns. Mr. Pack co-sign, you can't have a t-shirts in the room. I'm going to have to ask you to leave or take your shirt off. I'm sorry, that's the rule. Any of Frank Pafko's signs, I'm sorry, you cannot be here in the room with those on. I'm sorry I had to wait till this time I just now noticed. I'm sorry. There cannot be any kind of election sign information in there. Okay, and could then turn off all your cell phones. Okay, so that's it. If there's any other questions, you can ask Nancy Lindberg, who will be walking around with the cards. And so then I think we're ready to start. And so Donna and Sue, if you're ready to go, we'll get started.
Okay, thank you, Susan. As Sue Rosenberg said, we're going to start with 2 minutes for an introductory statement, and we'll start just going left to right. So we'll start with Mr. Howard.
Good morning. My name's Michael Howard, and I'm running for state representative. My wife, Sarah, and I, and our 3-year-old son, Kelvin, live in Richfield. This is our home, and we love it here. And it's really been an honor to serve this community on the Richfield City Council these last 4 years. I'm so proud of some of our accomplishments and where we've came as a city over these 4 years to become a more welcoming, vibrant city where we really challenge the status quo. We've moved forward on a paid parental leave policy. We've taken on affordable housing and passed tenant protection ordinances and worked to make this a community where everyone's invited to participate in the process. Before that, I worked at the legislature. I was honored to help work to raise the minimum wage, to invest in all-day kindergarten, and make marriage equality the law of the land. I really want to put my experience, both in our community and at the Capitol, to work for you and to work with you to create change. And I really believe we need change. You know, in this economy in Minnesota for the last several years, the economy's been going well, but it's those at the very top that have enjoyed most of the benefits, while far too many of us in our community struggle to get by, and that isn't right. And we can make change if we work together. I really believe that our politics can be a positive force, and I'm optimistic that if we work together, if we fight together, if we go to the Capitol together, we can make change and build a brighter future here in the community. And I really look forward to the chance today to talk about some of the reasons and why we and how we can do that together. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Good morning. There we go. Thank you for being here. I could have talked without it, I think, but I appreciate you guys being here. I'm super excited to be running for office. So my name is Kirsten Johnson, and I am running for House 50A, and I'm running for a couple reasons. Number one is to lower taxes. So when we're talking about people who are struggling to get by, it's because our taxes have been hiked up at every level of government. So city went up, state went up, county went up, and our school board taxes raised here in Richfield and in Bloomington last year. And again, the causes can be good, but it's been hurting seniors, it's hurting single moms like me, it's been kind of a pressure point for a lot of us. So I believe that through less spending and through less regulation at the government level and through some creative thinking and reconfiguring how we do things in government, we can stay just as efficient and have all the services without continuing to raise taxes year after year. So I have a lot of really great ideas about how to do that, and I'm super excited. I've been sharing them since I started running back in June, but I'm really excited to bring those to the Capitol next year. The second reason I'm running is because we need better representation at the House of Representatives. Right now, there's things like it's an 80-20 split of male to female representatives when it's a 50-50 split in the state. Part of the reason that I decided to run this year is because the Native American caucus is at risk of being disintegrated next year because we don't have enough natives who are coming back, the incumbents who are coming back next year. I'm a quarter Leech Lake Ojibwe, so I would be a bipartisan voice on that caucus, and I would be able to carry some bills into the legislature to make sure that they get read instead of this partisanship where they don't because only one party is carrying them. Another thing is, again, being a single mom, where 25% of households are single parents, less than 1% are represented in Congress. So I really believe representation matters, and I'm going to bring a lot of those voices there. The third reason that I'm running is because I believe in the public service realm and not making this a career position. This isn't for myself. This is to serve and get out. I think term limits need to happen. I think that bringing my military service to the Capitol can be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pafko?
Endorsed Republican candidate for, thank you, for District 63B. Tell you a little bit about myself. I'm 65 years old, married, 2 children, 6 grandchildren. I've lived in the district just about all of my life, since '82 in Richfield, and before that, South Minneapolis, also in District 63B. Went to Winona Elementary, Nokomis Junior High, and Roosevelt High School. Went to University of Minnesota, got a Bachelor of Science degree in Fisheries, and went to work for the Department of Natural Resources. Then I went to work as an aquatic biologist for the Minnesota Department of Transportation. I retired 6 years ago after 34 years with them. I have made my career trying to make government work better. At MnDOT, I developed a statewide wetland banking program for MnDOT projects that was used for the model when the state went to wetland mitigation. The 2 tunnels on the North Shore at Silver Cliff and Lafayette Bluff. I'm very proud that I talked the engineers into doing those tunnels instead of blasting notches in the cliff. I spent 4 years, as I say, a sabbatical away from the environmental office, being North Area Manager, where I developed highway projects like adding lanes to 94 up in Maple Grove, reconstructing the Unweave the Weave, the system interchange between 35E and 694, fixing the bottleneck on 94 at 3M, and getting the pictures, getting the projects going for Lafayette Bridge, 35E at Cayuga coming into St. Paul, Devil's Triangle up in project up on Highway 169 by Osseo and Brooklyn Park. And probably one of my best achievements, what I and my team did, was when the 35W bridge collapsed, we got the permits and documents done in 9 days. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jean Wagenius, State Representative. I'm your current State Representative.
Can you turn on your mic, Ms. Wagenius? Turn on your mic and speak right into the...
It's on.
Oh, okay. Can you put it right close to your mouth?
We will do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Jean Wagenius, State Representative for you right now, and I appreciate your past support and look forward to your future support. I live in Minneapolis, 4804 11th Avenue South, and have lived there since 1973. We moved into the neighborhood so my children could go to the first integrated schools in Minneapolis, and that was Hale and Field. They're proud graduates of public schools, in this case in Minneapolis, Hale, Field, Falwell, and South. I am at the legislature right now. I am the lead for our caucus. We are in the minority. I'm a DFLer. I'm the lead for our caucus on energy issues. And clearly, energy issues, renewable energies, climate change, is one of the defining issues of our time. And I expect we'll have some conversation about that here. If we don't, I want you to know that on my website, www.jeanwagenius.org, I discuss issues in depth so that you will know exactly where I stand on each issue. So I note that Climate change probably is one of the defining issues of our time, not probably is. The other one is equity. And one of the things that the legislature will be concentrating on this year is equity and equal opportunity for all of our citizens. I am one of the believers of Paul Wellstone that we all do better when we all do better. Appreciate your being here. I will be here afterward, and let's have a conversation in the hall.
Thank you. We have 5 questions that have been prepared by the League, and we've prepared a random number generated table so that no one's always going first and you're not always following the same person. And so we'll mix it up here. So for the first question, and you may have covered some of this in your introductory remarks, why are you running for office and what will be your major priorities if elected? And for this one, we'll start with Mr. Pafko.
Why am I running for office? I spent my career in state government trying to make government work better. It hasn't been doing very good for a long time. I've seen our educational system decline for the last 50 years. I've seen our tax system go considerably higher. My property taxes went up 25% this year. Thanks, Mike, you got a piece of that. I'm on a pension, I'm on Social Security. We've got to fix our tax system, we've got to get tax conformity, we have to fix our healthcare system. I will be opposing single payer because it is healthcare run by government bureaucrats. I will not allow a government bureaucrat to get in the way between decisions by a patient and a doctor. When you have single payer, you have rationing, and rationing means it's an early death sentence for the elderly. Thank you.
Thank you. And I should have said that, reminded everyone that there's 1 minute for responding to questions from here on out. And also the warning sign is put up at 20 seconds when you have 20 seconds left, just so you know that. Okay, the next person on this question is Mr. Howard.
Thank you. I'm running because I want to focus on making the capital work better for people. Right now, there's far too many of us that don't have access to the same economic opportunity, that work hard each day but struggle to get by. I'm talking about families, seniors, people with disabilities. We need to be intentional and work to make our economy work better for everyone. A few of my priorities: we do need to make affordable health care a priority. That's probably the number 1 or number 2 thing that comes up at the door. So we need to make it more accessible, reduce the cost of prescription drugs. 2, we need to focus on affordable housing. We have a housing crisis in Richfield and Bloomington. We need to make it more easy for all folks to have access to affordable housing. And lastly, I want to say, I want to work together with you. The job is more than just voting yes or no on the issues. It's doing this work together. I will work to organize and invite this community to come up to the Capitol so that we can fight together for change.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
Thank you. As part of if we go into the majority, and if we're in the minority, I will be probably, as a senior member, a lead on one of the major issues that we have. Likely, it will be energy because of my experience of the last year. So in that area, one of the things I would work on is renewable energy and pushing that forward. And one thing I'd like to tell you about is our schools in Minnesota spend roughly $220 million on electricity each year. So if we could help schools with solar, which is one of the things I would like to do, they would have that $220 million to spend for teachers and books and things like that. So that's one of the things I want to work on. I agree that affordable health care and education are 2 of my top priorities.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I think the reason that I'm running for office, because the thing is, I've been an activist for years, where I've been volunteering, I've been super involved in my community, I've been promoting social issues and trying to push change at the very grassroots level, which I think, and that's what the league does, and I think that's what everyone can do. The reason I'm running for office is because in becoming an activist, I found out there's all these behind the scenes things that are happening at the Capitol that I think are being done wrong. So again, things like the partisanship, if they just don't read bills of people that they don't agree with, regardless of whether the bill is viable or good or not. So the thing is, you have all these people in the Capitol who are go along to get along, or who are there to try to impress their party or impress their friends, so they don't say anything against it, even if they do oppose it. I'm someone who's bold and strong and pretty loud, in case you can't tell, who will actually say something and who will push back on things like that and really make changes in how things work at the Capitol, not just what works and what we need to make change.
Okay, thank you. The second question is, what is your philosophy regarding the role of government, taxes, and spending? And for this question, we'll start with Ms. Wagenius.
Well, one of the things when you begin to talk about local government is the state coming in and trying to preempt local governments from doing what they want to do. And we saw that in spades last year when the state was trying to preempt Minneapolis' safe and sick time. We saw that in preemption of some of the things going on outstate. I voted against the state preemption. I believe in local government, and I have a history of supporting local governments.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Wonderful. If you know anything about me, you know I am pretty libertarian. So what that means is that I believe in as little government as possible, as low of taxes as possible, and putting the onus back on individuals and back at the local level. So again, I agree with Ms. Wagenius that the state shouldn't preempt what you want to do. Whether I agree or not, I think that it should be up to Richfield to make a lot of decisions about how our community operates. Now, again, as a citizen, I can be vocal and try to make those changes, but as a legislator, I think we only do the very broad-based things. One of the biggest things is in education, where we not only allocate funding, but the government has gotten more and more in the business of telling teachers how to teach with standardized testing and standardized workbooks and making, or forcing every district to look the same in the state. I want to get away from things like that, where I do think we should be responsible for allocating funding and maintaining those schools at the fully funded level, but not telling them what to do, not getting so in their business that we make it the same across the state. So I look forward to doing that at every level. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
I believe in a responsive government that's for the people, by the people. And what I mean by that is we need to listen and make sure that we are working together to get things done, and to listen to Minnesotans that are being left behind. The notion of going back to just cutting government and talking points about living within our means, we've seen that. We saw that for a decade under Governor Pawlenty, and we saw people harmed, people with disabilities, our schools cut, people losing their jobs, and an economy that shrunk. I believe in a government that has a role in listening to Minnesotans, that has a safety net for people that aren't getting left behind, so that we all do better when we all do better.
Thank you. Mr. Pathko?
I've spent my career in state government. I believe that government is best that governs least. I spent my career trying to get transportation projects through the regulatory process. I've streamlined the regulatory process. It can be done. We got 35W through the regulations in 9 days. From the standpoint of taxes, bureaucracy can go on a budget. MnDOT is different. We had a dedicated fund which was not rising. I spent my time in my office managing a set budget over the years and having to absorb inflation, having to absorb attrition of staff through retirement and changes, and it can be done. As far as the economy's booming because of the Trump tax cuts. You may not believe it, but we've got low unemployment and high GDP.
Thank you. For our third question, what education policies do you advocate And what are your views regarding state funding for early childhood, K through 12, and higher education? And for this question, we'll start with Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, wonderful. So I've been attending the Richfield school board meetings, and they actually do a lot of recommendations for what they want the legislature to do. And the biggest message to me is that we do need to give it back to local control. So again, telling, the things that Richfield wants are not the same things that the reservation schools that I also worked with when I was with the Bureau of Indian Education want. We have totally different populations, totally different needs. So for the state to dictate what everyone should be doing at their level is not okay. What we do need to change at the state level is the funding formula. Right now it is complicated and confusing, and it can be easily adjusted, not adjusted, I don't want to make accusation, but there are things where it's being abused, and it's been proven in different levels. There are ways to streamline that and make it better so that every school is getting all the dollars they need, but still using it in the best way that they see possible. So again, less government is better, but efficient government is best. So I think finding ways to do that is going to be best for everybody at not just public schools, but every level of education, K through 12.
Thank you. Mr. Pafko?
I was in the Minneapolis public education system over 50 years ago, 50, 60, 60 years ago. My children went through Richfield. I've got grandchildren entering school now. We have been throwing money, increasing funds at the education system for 50 years. And what are the results? Test scores are going down. Graduation rates are going down. The achievement gap between Hispanics, minorities, and Native Americans versus the white population is astronomical. Something needs to change. We have done the experiment. We have proved that throwing money at the problem does not work. We must find something else. And I believe in education choice. I believe that the state funding should follow the child, not the school district. We need to expand our charter schools and things like Cristo Rey, find things that will work. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
Thank you. I had the bill that got the first state dollars for all-day kindergarten. It started off for children in schools that had high free and reduced lunch. It took us a long time to get all-day K for every child. I was very proud to vote for that. Similarly, I am supportive of preschool funding, state funding for preschool. One of the things to think about is that we spend a lot of money on remedial education, so does our business community. We'd be much better off starting children off right. All the science says start early, start early. And so preschool, all-day K, they are going to pay off for us in the long run. The other thing that I think we have to worry about is student debt for colleges, and that's something we're going to have to wrestle with at the legislature this year.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Quality schools are just so vital to our community, and I really believe it's our top budget priority as the legislature, and I think this is a big disagreement, source of disagreement between both Frank and Kirsten and me. I will be a strong supporter of funding our public schools. And if you talk to our public schools, their number one priority is making sure that we're adequately investing in our schools so that we can hold down class sizes, so that there's an ability to innovate in the classroom. We still have not caught up with inflation-adjusted spending for schools based on a decade of ideology that really hamstrung our schools. And so I will support our schools. And pre-K, I will support universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds. That's how we reduce the opportunity gap. All the evidence suggests that. So I will be someone that will work hard to make sure every single 3- and 4-year-old has access to a quality pre-K education.
Thank you. For our fourth question, what are your views regarding the current fiscal disparities law? Please describe any changes in the law that you would advocate. And for this question, we'll start with Ms. Wagenius.
Thank you. I support the fiscal disparities law. I don't see the need to make any changes. It's good for Richfield.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
I gotta say, this is something that I will be looking into. This is something where it's running as a legislature. It's been a huge learning experience, and everywhere I go, it's something new that I have to learn about and dig into. So I've met with the disability community before, that I learned all these disability laws. I meet with the school board. I learn all about school funding and legislation and what they need. And honestly, the fiscal stuff is something where I absolutely have experts, and I have people that I would go to and people to talk to, and it's something that I would dig in with them and wouldn't answer too much about now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
I support our current fiscal disparities law and would very much be hesitant to make changes because they're really important to the city of Richfield. And when we're talking about fiscal disparities, we're talking about a formula that affects distribution of local resources to communities across the state. And right now, Richfield is a benefactor of fiscal disparities. And if we're making changes to that formula, we need to be very careful in what that's doing to this community. And so if we're going to make changes, we need to be reticent about what that's going to do for Richfield. I'll be focusing on that.
Mr. Pafko?
Fiscal disparities is an important law. It's a good law. We need to help the poor communities fund their essential services. But my question is why is the city with the highest tax base, Minneapolis, the biggest recipient? We need to look at, 2 years ago I said I couldn't understand why the city of Minneapolis property tax on a home of lesser value was considerably higher than mine in Richfield. Well, mine went up 25% this year, so that disparity has been solved. So we need to look at, we need to look at the funding formula and make sure that it is fair and equitable.
Okay, thank you. For the last question by the league, do you support increased funding for transportation? If yes, what funding sources would you support, and what are your priorities for use of transportation funds? For this question, we'll start with Mr. Howard.
Absolutely. We need to fund our transportation system. The legislature has not been meeting its need to do so, and we need a solution that is all of the above, not either or. We've seen too much at the legislature where folks are pitting rural against urban, transit versus roads and bridges. We need to craft a solution that is about improving roads, bridges, transit options all across the state. I support using user fees like the gas tax to do so. That's how we funded our roads and bridges. And I think that's either that or another dependable source of revenue is the way to go. And last thing I'll say on this is for Richfield, we have to be investing in transit. There are forces at the legislature that are trying to cut money for transit. I'll be an advocate because our community, people with disabilities, our diverse community depends on transit. This is an issue of equity, and I will fight for transit funding at the legislature.
Thank you. Mr. Pafko?
I worked for 34 years for MnDOT. Roads and bridges, transportation is underfunded. We have gone from trying to expand the system to just trying to maintain pavement, bridges, and existing infrastructure. We need to give more dedicated funding to transportation. We need to do that by switching taxes, sales taxes on auto repairs, car parts, as some of which was done 2 years ago. We need to move that into the highway user distribution fund so it is split out. We need to take the current unconstitutional diversion of gas tax funds to the MPCA for the petrol fund and reimburse that. It's small on a yearly basis, but it's worth $500 million. We need to fund buses, not billion-dollar trains, and we need to have a good transit system of buses. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
Thank you. We do need a balanced package for transit and roads. We are underfunding our transportation system. We are falling behind our competitors. And when I talk about competitors, I talk about regional cities like Dallas and Denver and Portland, way far ahead of us on their transportation infrastructure. It is not good for our business community and is not good for people who need to go to work and commute. So a balanced package. I disagree with putting a sales tax, a constitutional dedication of sales tax, using that on auto parts and using that for transportation funding. It takes directly away from education funding. We can't play those games of switching money and pretending you're not taking away from education. So I'm definitely against that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Yes, I think I agree with we do need to fully fund transportation. So again, for even being a low government person, military and roads are two of the biggest things that most of us agree are something that need to be maintained at a higher level. So absolutely funding it, but again, funding it intelligently. And we're talking about projects that we would start them today, they don't get done for 20 or 30 years. So we need to be forward thinking in our projects. So like Frank is saying, getting away from rail that's heavily subsidized, that I think is going to go away. That's a very backwards looking technology. And when you watch the TED Talks or you listen to people like Elon Musk and Tesla and things where they're talking about within 15 to 20 years, we're going to have cars that all talk to each other, that are fully automated, that are self-driving, things like that. Creating infrastructure that fits future technology, not past technology, which I think is what this legislature has been pushing for way too long.
Thank you. We're now moving to the questions from the audience, and these are being randomly drawn by Sue Sandal. The first one is about criminal justice. Please share if you support bail reform and sentencing reform. And for this one, we'll start with Ms. Johnson.
Absolutely. I have, again, seen this firsthand. I work with soldiers who are struggling with PTSD, which includes some criminal issues, where the bail system is absolutely biased against people who are poor, who don't have family, who don't have connections in the community. And it's completely unfair. I think that it's illegal detention, in my opinion, to hold people without formal charges and without convictions. So 100% I would get away from that. It's also part of what keeps urban areas so poor, is that, both our bail, parole and probation system, there's a whole thing where, if you're on probation, you have to go get random drug tests twice a week or something. So there's no way you can live off a transit system or far away from the Hennepin County Center. So again, people who want to start their lives over and get a fresh start, go somewhere different, are held by our systemic issues in how we correct people. I think there are better ways to do it, and I think that's 100% something that I want to talk about at the state level when I get there.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
Thanks. Yes, I support bail reform. I see that our judges are starting to work on those issues, and I think we should be supporting them. This has got to be a partnership between the legislature and the judicial system in supporting bail reform. Totally support it. In terms of sentencing guidelines, again, the same thing. We need to work with the judicial system, with the judges who have experience, and it's a partnership between the judicial system and the legislature for reform. I agree that we need to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Pafko?
I'm also in favor of bail reform. California, I think it's California, going to have a very interesting experiment about removing cash bail requirements. I'm eager to see how that turns out, and can it be adapted to Minnesota. In terms of the criminal justice and sentencing, I agree that we need to look at, is mental health an issue that needs treatment rather than mere incarceration? So I'm willing to look at that. I also agree it's a partnership between the legislature and the judiciary. You're not going to do this by yourself.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
I agree with a lot of what's been said by all the candidates. I think that when you look at our criminal justice system, that is rooted, or the root of a lot of our racial disparities are in a criminal justice system that long needs some reform. So along with looking at bail reform, I think it's important for us to look at our drug sentencing laws. I think that's something we should take a look at. And I also think we need to expand voting access to folks that have served their time and want to be valuable members of society and they want to vote. So there's a host of issues with our criminal justice system that we ought to look at, and we ought to bring a racial equity lens to all of that work. That's vitally important as we make changes.
Thank you. The next question is, if necessary, which state services would you reduce or eliminate? And for this question, we'll start with Mr. Pathko.
State government can go on a budget. You can do a slow reduction of administrative budgets across the board through all the state agencies and ask them to manage better. I was a manager for over 20 years, and I was given a budget where I had to reduce staff probably one FTE every year to every 2 years. It can be done. You can continue to deliver good services. You streamline, you find out what's important and what isn't important. So the answer is, I would do a cut across all administrative parts of the state government right off the bat. I'd direct that the transit subsidies go from trains to buses. I'd look at streamlining regulations so it costs less to deliver those services and those mandates. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
First, I would say that if we're facing a budget deficit, I'd look at changes to our tax system. Just in the last legislative session, the legislature cut taxes for big tobacco companies. Give me a break. I'll work to fix that regardless, but if we're facing a budget deficit, that's where I'll look first. And I will preserve and fight for services, our safety net services. We have seen in bad budget times, people go after services that affect our most vulnerable Minnesotans, and I will fight against that. If we're in a tough budget time, something that I would look at is some of the subsidies that we give in economic development. If we're in a leaner time, I'm going to focus on services that serve Minnesotans and serve people rather than some of those subsidies when it comes to prioritizing where I direct my attention.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
I agree with Frank, where again, it's not about cutting services, it's about making services more efficient, and there are plenty of ways to do that. And one that I was reminded of recently that I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of is that in the government, there's a use-or-lose budget supply system where, and we just hit this because I work with the military right now, so every August and September, everyone runs around and says, we have to spend X number, we have this many more dollars, we have to spend this by October 1, otherwise we don't get our funding for next year. So now we're buying 20 staplers and stupid posters and dumb things to fill this budget. And they do this at every level of government. This happened when I worked for federal, it's military, it's happening all over. And it's a use-or-lose system that, again, was made so that you use your money efficiently so that we're sure that we're giving you the money that you need. But what it's become is that there's no incentive to save money. There's no incentive to say, hey, guys, wow, we're down $20,000. We should get rewarded for that next year. That is one area that is absolutely easy across every single service and across the board in government that would save taxpayers money and save systems, or save all of our systems from that.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
Thank you. I have some trouble with the assumption of the question that there are services that should be cut because we want to make government smaller. We have to talk about, first, what we have the common good, and what should we be doing as government for the common good? So many things have been cut for the last 20, say, since 2000. So many things have been cut that we're not providing the services that we should be providing. Mr. Howard mentioned that we have never caught up on the cuts for K-12 education. We've never caught up, and that is not serving children very well. I will say there is one place for efficiency that I think we should go, and that is doing more work with computers. Our computer systems across the state are ancient and need to be upgraded. So that's one of the places where I think we could get more efficiency. We don't do it because you have
I'm
to
sorry.
appropriate the money for the computers.
Thank you. Our next question is, how can you as a state representative work with the cities and counties as well as the federal government for the residents of Minnesota? For this question, we'll start with Mr. Howard.
I think I can work quite well with our partners at the local level, at the federal level. I'll say, quite honestly, the decision to run for the legislature, one of the challenging parts is how much I enjoy serving on the city council locally here. But what makes it a little easier is knowing that there are very good leaders representing the community on the council, and I will have a strong partnership and have the experience of knowing important issues, whether it become fiscal disparities, the I-35W exchange, the underpass. You know, having that base of knowledge about the important issues for the city will help me serve the community well. And generally, it's about relationship building. It's important for us to have strong relationships with our leaders in all levels of government. I will do that, and I will work to connect the community to those representatives. Because as a state representative, often you'll get an email or as a council member, and the question might be about a local issue. It might be about a national issue. I view the job as a representative isn't to just vote yes or no. It's to connect constituents to the representation that they need, and I will make that a focus.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
I think a lot of it is about finding your commonalities. So again, like you're saying, a lot of people don't know which issues go to which jurisdiction. So you complain about something that the state can't control, but again, I can point you in the right direction. I can help you, or I can tell you what I can control about it, and then bring you over to, say, you know, the school board to actually make the curriculum change. State can't do that, they can. Or, you know, your city taxes, you need to talk to your city council, not to me. So building those relationships, but then just educating people on how that happens and getting people excited for all these levels of government, where I love how they all work together, and I love how we can blend and mesh, and how there's all these different compromises and different, like, we can set an example to the state to say lower taxes because we know, you know, Hennepin County has a big project coming up, or because we can help somebody else in Bloomington or Richfield, so that we're not getting these huge hits like we've had the last 2 years, where every system is taxing us just a little bit and just raising it a couple percent, but it all adds up to something bigger. We do need to communicate way better, and I don't think that's been happening because of partisanship and because of a lot of other working in silos kind of issues.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
Thank you. I think the relationship between the legislature and the Richfield City Council, and since the district that I represent is both Minneapolis and and Richfield, between Minneapolis City Council and legislature, good relationships. They're solid. We discuss things. We get on the same page. So I appreciate the effort that Richfield and Minneapolis City Councils put forth to make sure we're all on the same page. It's different with the federal government. That's where the stress is right now, because we cannot rely on our federal partners for things that we have relied on for years. And that is, I think, the biggest issue that we at the local level have to wrestle with.
Thank you. Mr. Pafko?
When I was North Area Manager for MnDOT, I was the first point of contact for MnDOT with cities, counties, and the state legislators in the counties of Ramsey and Oka and about the northern third of Hennepin County. You show up, you talk to them, you listen to their concerns, what they need from you, you consider it, you tell them, you help them when you can, you tell them why you can't help them when you can't. You represent them at other levels of state government within the department. From the standpoint of the federal government, you represent to the federal bureaucrats, to the federal elected officials, the same thing. What are the concerns? What can they do to help? And find out what they can and what they cannot do. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is a long one, so bear with me. Do you support amending the U.S. Constitution to make clear that corporations and other artificial entities do not have constitutional rights and that money is not speech? And campaign spending should be limited through regulation. And will you support a resolution in the Minnesota State Legislature calling for this amendment? Yes or no? And for this, we will start with Ms. Johnson.
I think it started with, can you clarify again? It started with U.S. Constitution, but then goes Minnesota Legislature?
I think, yes,
I guess-
it's talking about the concept of amending the U.S. Constitution, and would you support a resolution in the Minnesota Legislature calling for that?
I guess calling for that corporations are not, I'm sorry if this is your question. I wish I were, in a discussion with you. That would help a lot more. I guess to get basically to it, it's, again, the taxes need to be, fairly dispersed around. I think that when you're getting into the corporations or people discussion, I think that's kind of what you're getting at. I think that there is still something to be said for, corporations create jobs, corporations are doing something for us. We do want to incentivize them to build roots and grow. I mean, here in Richfield, we take huge pride in having Best Buy here. Now, does that mean that Best Buy is a person that has any more rights to say what happens or what should go on or have any more influence with your legislature than you do as an individual? No, absolutely not. And I think that's pretty common sense. But as far as, and then I think there was some campaign funding, things like that, of making that fair. I can tell you it's a super complicated process, and it's been immensely confusing for normal people to run for office. So I think that's something that absolutely needs to be reformed on every level, and something I would look at once I'm there.
Thank you. Ms. Ogenius?
I totally disagree with the Supreme Court decision that corporations are people for the purposes of free speech. Corporations are not people for the purposes of free speech. So yes, we would need a constitutional amendment, and you'd go through the regular process of amending the U.S. Constitution, and that would be a resolutions coming from the states.
Thank you. Mr. Pafko?
I do not support amending the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It's way too important. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison, I think they got it right. As far as are corporations persons, they are owned by shareholders, just as unions are composed of individuals. I support campaign finance laws that treat everyone equally. You do not give advantages to one over the other.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Yes, I support it. And let's be honest what this is about. This is about the millions and billions of dollars in campaign spending in our elections. Who is sick of turning their TV on during this election right now? This is money, a lot of it being spent, untolds, much of it dark money, so we don't even know who's financing it. And this constitutional amendment is about bringing more power back into the people in our election system. So I would support it. It does require a U.S. Constitution change. There are some things at the Minnesota legislature we can do to reform our campaign finance laws that I support. One of them is in the area of transparency. You get a mailer paid for by Jobs Coalition or some name of entity you're not sure, there's a good chance we don't even know who's funding that ad. We can pass a transparency law so at least you can see who is paying for the junk mail that's headed to your mailbox. And so we need to do more in our election system. I think all of that spending and negative ads hurts our democracy, and we should take action at all levels of government.
Okay, thank you. The next question is regarding recreational marijuana. With appropriate oversight, do you support legalizing recreational marijuana? For this question, we'll start with Mr. Pafko.
I support expanding the medical use of marijuana. I do not support legalizing recreational marijuana. It would be, and for the states that have done so, it is a felony trap as long as the federal government criminalizes marijuana and marijuana use. Whenever you go for a federal permit. Whenever you buy a gun, you have to sign a form that says you're not using this. So you are either depriving civil rights of someone if you encourage them to do recreational marijuana, or you are creating a felony trap for them. Shouldn't do it.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Yes, I support moving in this direction, and it is an issue that requires a lot of deliberation in exactly how it's structured. It does, I think, need to be regulated, and we need to think about the revenue piece of this as well. But it's important to me that if we're going to move in this direction, we also need at the same time look at criminal justice reform. We've had drug laws in this country for decades that have fostered great racial inequities in our prison systems, and so I think we ought to look at criminal justice reform for some of our nonviolent drug offenders along the same track of pursuing recreational marijuana. And then the medical piece of this is important too. We need to structure a law in which doctors have the ability to prescribe medical marijuana to their patients. And that's not easily said by just saying yes or no. We're going to have to work to make sure that whatever law we pass addresses the medical piece of this too, which is vitally important.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Absolutely, I support marijuana legalization, and this is kind of a dichotomy because I work in substance abuse prevention. So the reason that I support marijuana legalization is because I've seen how much it helps in the opiate crisis. So when you're looking at states like Washington and Colorado who have had this for a while, their deaths by drug use are far lower, even though their actual drug use per person is higher. So when we're talking about the mortality rate of drugs, marijuana is something that people can use in place of the painkillers and the anxiety medications and a lot of other things. So that's something that I would look forward to. And again, since they've legalized it there, they are innovating and they're growing in their science and what we know about marijuana, far from where they were even just 5 or 10 years ago. So if Minnesota can get on that train too and start helping people, I think that'll be great. And I do agree with Frank's concerns about the federal level, but I see this kind of sweeping like gay marriage did, where it's something where it starts at the state level, it's something that grows and we see that it's okay here, and eventually the federal is going to follow suit.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
Thank you. We definitely need reform, particularly because of the way our laws are applied and the equity issues involved. It seems so easy, but it is going to be a difficult process to do this, and one of the difficult issues as we go forward, and I think we should go forward, one of the difficult issues is going to be grappling with driving under the influence. How do we deal with that? How do we measure it? So there are a lot of difficult problems we've got to deal with, but do I think we need to move forward? I do.
Okay, thank you. The next question is a bit complex, so I'll read it slowly. During the 2018 legislative session, over 70 legislators signed a bipartisan initiative calling upon the state's legislative auditor to use only the most rigorous auditing methods on HMO handling of tax funds for public health programs. The legislative auditor has failed to answer this request. What will you do in 2019 about this situation of lax standards on HMO auditing? Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Wagenius.
Okay. Okay, this is an issue that's where the bottom line is transparency, and I do believe in the transparency is critical here. But the question assumes that the legislative auditor is the right group to audit this huge system, and I question whether they have the capacity, that they are actually big enough to do it. So the approach I would take would be for the legislature, which does not enforce laws. What we do is we make them, but we do have oversight, is to hold hearings and to ask the administration, which does enforce laws, to do the audit. So the audit we have to pay for. And one of the reasons I think nothing has happened so far is people who say we need to audit have not been willing to appropriate the money to do the audit that is necessary. That should be done by the administration with the legislature appropriating the money and probably through the Department of Administration, State Department of Administration.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Yes, we need more transparency with our HMO dollars. And I think this is something that the public is shielded from the public, and most would be surprised about the amount of money that we're talking about here. It's billions of dollars that our HMOs manage when it comes to healthcare in Minnesota. And so, yes, we do need accountability and transparency. And I support Representative Wigenius's ideas about looking at new ways to try to get at that if we're running into roadblocks. And the other part of this that I think is important to mention is this gets at broader healthcare reform. We can't pursue some of the transformational change I think we need on healthcare that does get rid of the middleman, that does cut out insurance costs, unless we have an ability to audit how HMO dollars are being spent. And so this is important. We ought to be able to do it working together, Democrats and Republicans.
Thank you. Mr. Pafko?
HMOs definitely need to be audited, and audited as vigorously as possible. Few people remember HMOs were foisted upon us by legislation sponsored by Ted Kennedy in the late 70s. It has moved to put administrators and bureaucrats in control of our medical spending so that today there is more money spent on medical administration than there is on doctors, nurses, and hospitals. We have to change that. Legislative auditor would be a good person to do it, but he's overwhelmed already auditing the mistakes of state government, Minnesota IT, the child care credit debacle, elder abuse. We need to make this as part of a major healthcare reform, but yes, they need to be audited and no longer charging $100 aspirins that cost them a nickel.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Yep, totally agree with Frank of just the audit needs to happen. And again, these things should be in place. So when we have government services, there's no reason that we should have to ask for more money, for more audits, because that should be how things work, is that they are absolutely transparent and easy to read and easy to understand, and that there are already auditors that don't get overwhelmed by all these things. Each program should be able to be easily audited and reviewed. So when we're talking about dollars, that's the other thing, is that you're talking about billions of dollars. This is just the HMO program. So if we go to a socialized healthcare, think about all the issues we're going to have there and all the audits we're going to need there and all the, when government starts controlling something else, we need to pay for somebody else to check on government. So you're adding one more thing. I think this is why giving things back to the free market and letting them regulate and having people have the power to buy and move and boycott and do whatever they want in the free market is the best way to do it and the least expensive and most efficient for the taxpayers.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what specific measures do you support to decrease gun violence? And for this question, we'll start with Mr. Howard.
We absolutely need to take on this issue and listen to the Minnesotans that are demanding urgent action to address gun violence. I was so impressed this year when Richfield high school students organized a walkout and marched to City Hall, advocating for themselves and the change that they want to see. And I want to see and work with those students to be up at the Capitol, because to get this done, I believe we need the people and our young leaders and legislators that will listen to fight together. That's how we beat the NRA and the special interests that are blocking common sense reforms. The things I support: background checks on all guns, no exceptions. 9 in 10 Minnesotans support this. You can't get 9 in 10 Minnesotans to agree on just about anything. We ought to be able to get this done. I support red flag laws so that we can keep guns out of the hands of the dangerously mentally ill. That'll prevent suicides as well in this country. And I also support looking at banning bump stocks and military-style assault rifles. We don't allow folks to carry around bazookas. We can look at reforms that will take these mass-killing machines out of the hands of folks. Let's work together and get this done.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Johnson?
The biggest thing is, supporting gun education, of just if people are smarter about their rights and about, the actual weapons themselves. I think that helps a lot in our safety and things. Mental health reform is absolutely something, because really our gun violence problem is tied to the mental health issues in the country and how we don't treat them well enough. So I think that's something that needs to be handled. However, red flag laws are absolutely an injustice on due process. And this is something that we learned, again, my native tribes back 100 years ago. Red flag laws were essentially done to take away all of our weapons and imprison all of our warriors, so that when the settlers started coming up, they could massacre us. They weren't called battles, they were called massacres, and everything after 1898. And that's because of what were essentially red flag laws. So my concern with promoting things like that is that it's going to be racial disparities. It's going to be whoever is in power gets to choose who is red flagged, of who do you consider a threat or who do you want to call a terrorist today, so that you take away their right to bear arms and their protection for themselves. I absolutely don't agree with that. There are plenty of other things we can do to help this problem.
Thank you. Mr. Pafko?
When you listen to the media, you don't realize that gun violence has been declining dramatically over the last several decades. Coincidentally or not coincidentally, that has been mirrored by an increase in firearms in the hands of law-abiding citizens. Most people don't realize that, well, or they would realize that police officers are some of the most law-abiding citizens we have out here. Permit to carry holders are 5 to 7 times more law-abiding than cops. We need to reduce or eliminate gun-free zones. We need to harden our schools. We absolutely need mental health reform and to treat those folks, but it needs, I agree with Kirsten, it needs due process. The police and the school administrators need to keep their eyes open and not be blinded like in Parkland, where they didn't react to the cues.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
Thank you. I support universal background checks, red flag laws, banning bump stocks, and military-style weapons. One of the things that is happening at the legislature that I am pleased about is we have groups like Protect Minnesota who have done wonders in educating all of us, including legislators, about gun violence and what can be done to make us all safer. So there are lots of groups out there working on this issue, and I am pleased to be supported, or to be someone who's supported by Protect Minnesota. So, and I would urge other folks to join in with this effort.
Thank you. The next question is, what is your transportation plan? Congestion in our district is bad and getting worse. And for this question, we'll start with Mr. Pafko.
Wonderful.
Good question. We definitely need to spend money in increasing the capacity of our road system. Roads are responsible for 96% of the trips that are generated in the metropolitan area, and we are spending virtually all of our money, of our capital investment money, on trains that go from point A to point B and back again. We need buses, school buses, bikes, pedestrians, cars, freight, all use the road system. We need to have transit pay their fair share in upgrading the road system, and we need to expand our bus system, our bus transit system.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
We absolutely need to invest in our roads and our highways to relieve congestion. In this district in 50A, we have the 494-35W interchange. I'm sure I'm not alone as someone that's sat in a traffic jam there at 3 p.m. on a Sunday. You know, it's one of the worst congestion areas in the country. The last legislature was able to get some resources to begin working on that. I will work to press that work forward. But the last thing I want to comment in is you're hearing again this pitting transit versus roads and bridges. That's a recipe for more gridlock at the Capitol and not getting the political solution done of bringing Democrats and Republicans together to address our transportation system. We need an all of the above, not an either or. We need greater Minnesota, the metro area, to work together to craft a transportation plan that serves the needs across the state, because there are needs across the state. So I will bring the concerns facing Richfield to the Capitol, but I'll work with legislators all across the state, because we need a statewide solution if we're actually going to get this done.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
I think you've heard some wise words from Mr. Howard. We need a statewide solution. We have done this once before where we moved the state forward and everybody won. Folks in outstate Minnesota in small towns need transit just as much as we do to get folks to work and to get folks to doctor's appointments. Minnesota is way far behind on transit that moves lots of people. We're just nibbling around the edges of electrifying our transit system. Yet we have a manufacturer in Minnesota who does electric buses out of St. Cloud, and I believe, well, I think Breckenridge, but it doesn't matter which other. We have people that are manufacturing electric buses in Minnesota right now, and we're not even taking advantage of that. So you look at it from a jobs point of view and a moving people point of view, we have so many opportunities that we are not taking right now.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Yeah, the question I think was about alleviating congestion. So again, then it goes to Frank of, once again, increased capacity of what we can do. And like I said in the previous transportation question, being more forward thinking. Because if you're talking about transit, way up north, when you go to the reservations, you have kids who take an hour-and-a-half bus ride to class every day. There's no transit system you can build that's gonna go, again, point A to point B in those huge rural areas that we can't even conceive of how far away it is house to house and from house to school and places you need to get. The future is going to be autonomous electronic cars, and I think that we need to build the capacity for roads to be able to handle those. And again, it's going to be something where they're individual, where people are driving, there could be carpool kind of systematic issues where they communicate with each other and they do things like that. But I think that if we focus just on transit and trains, that we are focused in the wrong direction. I do think there's an all-encompassing way to do it, but I think it's in a futuristic way, not this looking back at what we have done and what we should be doing to try to be like everybody behind us.
Okay, thank you. The next question relates to minimum wage. Do you support a $15 minimum wage? If so, how do we avoid workers losing their jobs when companies put in automation or don't fill openings due to the high cost? And for this question, we'll start with Ms. Wagenius.
Thank you. I think probably everybody has just seen that Amazon has said we are going to do a $15 minimum wage for all of our folks. And I probably are doing that because they need to attract workers. In this day and age, one of the biggest issues that Minnesota and other jurisdictions have is we are running out of workers. So wages are one of the things that attract workers to businesses, and so I think you've seen Amazon start to set the standard. Walmart set a wage, and they are obviously getting ready to match Amazon. From a state's point of view, yes, we have to go on a stepped-up minimum wage to reach the $15 an hour.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
It's wonderful that you talked about Amazon because they increase their wage based on free market needs, which I think is exactly what should happen. When we, the state, tell everybody how to do it, nobody wins because jobs are more than just wages. So again, yes, to attract wages, Amazon can afford to do that. But now they're going to go to the legislature and say, hey, you should tell everyone else to do $15. Who's that going to hurt? It's going to hurt Hub Hobby, who again can hire retirees where this is their part-time job where it gives you a purpose and something to do. They don't need $15 an hour. They have income in other places. So they're happy to do that job, and forcing Hub Hobby to pay everyone $15 is going to cut them out. Same thing when I started working at Byerly's. I made $5.75 an hour. I was a high school kid. I lived, all my expenses were paid for. I don't need $15 an hour. So I got paid in experience and learning and doing something else. As soon as we go to 15, we cut all of those jobs at the top, the bottom, the disabled, anybody else who just needs work for a reason other than wage. It's not the way to do it. We need to keep it free market, and more companies will follow Amazon's suit if we let the free market work how it's supposed to.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
I absolutely support a $15 minimum wage. I worked at the Minnesota legislature when we passed the last minimum wage, and we heard a lot of these same kind of, frankly, fear tactics about, oh, the economy is going to go away and people are going to lose jobs, and it hasn't panned out. I believe that's because when workers have more resources in their pocketbook to spend in their community, everybody wins. And if we allow the government to abdicate its responsibility on behalf of working people, the people that lose are low-wage workers. They will be left behind. And so we need a livable wage. In Richfield, if you make a minimum wage and try to buy an average apartment, you're going to pay more than 50% of your income just on housing. That doesn't take into fact childcare, transportation. So we need to listen to the community. The workers in this district especially need a livable wage, and I'll fight for a $15 minimum wage for all workers across the state.
Thank you. Mr. Pafko?
When government imposes a $15 minimum wage, it is inevitable that companies will look to reduce their labor costs and mechanize and put people out of jobs. What we're finding out, however, is a good economy increases wages. How do you get a good economy? Well, you decrease taxes and you decrease regulations and you make a good business climate. You get plentiful jobs. There's a competition. Wages increase. Amazon, as we said, just increased to $15. They also cut their bonus program so that people are actually going to make more. But this way, if they can get the government to do $15, they can drive their competitors out of the market. Richfield's having a development boom right now. Why? Because there's small businesses in Minneapolis that are looking to get away from the $15 minimum wage.
Thank you. For this next question, it relates to our natural resources. How would you work to protect Minnesota's natural resources? And for this question, we'll start with Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, this is something that absolutely you get to the local sources. So again, having worked with, I work now with the National Guard, where I get to go up to northern Minnesota all the time, and it's gorgeous. But they know what their needs are. So listening at the most local levels, they know when the mining is too much or when they're encroaching on boundary water land. So we need to really listen to those representatives. And this goes back to, as mentioned once before, there is a division of metro versus outstate legislators happening right now at the Capitol. And I've heard that on both sides of the aisle and all over the place. So this is something where we need to defer to them, of the people who actually live there. Here in Richfield, we don't have an abundance of natural resources. I think we should protect our green space, but again, that should be done at the local level, not the state level. When we're talking about state natural resources, we need to go to the people who really see that and know the issues, and stop legislating from the metro area to tell the North what to do.
Thank you. Mr. Pafko?
When I retired from MnDOT, I was the Chief Environmental Officer for the department and the Director of the Office of Environmental Stewardship. I spent most of my career trying to figure out how you can complete needed transportation projects and leave the environment, hopefully leave the environment as good or better than when you started. I've got a long career in that, from thousands of acres of wetland mitigation, to the tunnels on the North Shore, to a channel change on the Minnesota River that didn't happen at Le Sueur. How you can deal with that is you cannot protect natural resources by just saying no, because then there's a reaction from that to, yes, we need those resources. You work together, you work collaboratively, you streamline the resources, and you figure out the right solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wagenius?
Thank you. 10 years ago, probably many of you in this room, voted for a 3/8 sales tax increase and much of it was used to protect natural resources. I was one of the authors of that bill and worked hard to get it passed. The legislature's role right now is in oversight, and we need to do some significantly more oversight of how this money is being spent. So 1/8 is going for habitat, and that seems to be going well, but there is room for a lot of oversight here to make sure we're getting the bang for the buck that you expect. The 1/8 for water, I am troubled by, because we have spent over $1 billion in 10 years, but yet our drinking water sources for everybody, whether you're rural and private, you're a municipal, or you are somebody in Minneapolis that drinks Mississippi River water, all of our drinking water sources are becoming more polluted. So we need oversight here.
Sorry, that's time.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Well, Minnesota's natural resources are one of the key ways that we stand out. I think we all as Minnesotans embrace what makes that part of our identity as Minnesotans. And we only get one, so we need to be very protective of our natural resources. For this community, I think water is really the key priority. A community like Richfield and Bloomington both pride themselves on our clean drinking water. I think there's a healthy competition about if the water tastes better in Richfield or Bloomington. We need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on that locally. And in Richfield, across the state, there's just wastewater issues, infrastructure issues that are all kind of reaching their age at the same time. And so we need to adequately put resources to make sure that we can protect our clean drinking water and our natural resources.
Thank you. We're nearing the end of our time, and we have time for closing remarks. And you each have 1 minute to make closing remarks. And for this phase, we'll start with Ms. Wagenius.
Thank you. Just before I start the closing remarks, I want to mention that Richfield actually does get its water from municipal wells and has some of the best water. It's very different from Minneapolis. It gets its water from the Mississippi River. I would welcome your support in the coming election. I am an accessible legislator. I hold meetings with my constituents on the second Saturday of each month, and that will be next Saturday. I can't publicize it now because we are in an election season. I mean, I can't use state resources to publicize it. I can certainly talk about it. I would welcome you to come to one of these second Saturday meetings at Mayflower Church, 9:30 in the morning. So I'm accessible. I work on local issues like the Lake Nokomis and Lake Hiawatha issues, similarly on issues with infrastructure in Richfield. So I welcome you to contact me, to look at my website, www.jeanwagenius.org, where I talk about issues in a greater depth than we can do here in 1 minute per issue. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you so much for having me. Again, I'm so grateful that you guys all came out for this. I have loved local politics for as long as I can now, since high school. And I've dug in so hard here in Richfield since I've lived here for the last 10 years. I've got my kids involved, and I've done everything I can to get involved at a resident level. So now I am so honored to be here, and I'm so honored that you guys are here to listen to us and talk to us. And it's something where I want to run as a regular person, and I want to open the doors so that there are more people who can come in behind me and not just groomed politicians who are granted these seats like it has been in the past. So I really hope, you can look for things like that. So kind of to that, the accessibility thing, Frank and I are actually hosting a transportation discussion after this. It's going to be at 1 p.m. at Augsburg Library, so we hope that you can come out for that. We weren't able to have any debates because my My opponent didn't want to, but hopefully we can have some really good discussions with the community out there. Learn more about me at kirsten4house.com, kirsten4house.com, and all the Facebook, Instagram, and millennial kind of stuff that I exist on. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Thanks for being here, and thank you to the League of Women Voters. You do an excellent job putting on these forums for us to debate the issues, and I really appreciate you, so thank you. And thanks for coming. This time in our country, when I door knock, and I've done a lot of door knocking and talking with folks, what keeps coming up is, especially at the national level, a disdain for a politics that is more about beating up the other side, that is partisan, that is divided, that isn't responding to the needs of the community. We need to make local and state government a model of how we get things done, that actually responds to the issues important to our community, that improves lives. We can do that. We can stop the closed-door meetings at the Capitol and invite all of us, the public, to fill the people's house. That's how we make change. We can work together and focus on the priorities where the special interests have had too much of an outsized influence. And I want to just, I know time's running out, there's a few issues we didn't get to. We need to raise wages for personal care assistance. We need to invest in affordable housing. We can do this work together, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pavko?
I was raised with the values of hard work, honesty, respecting people, being frugal, obeying the law, being patriotic, and believing in God. I was a Democrat, but 30 years ago I realized that those values were no longer values of the Democratic Party. They were Republican values. So I changed, and I started voting Republican 30 years ago. I support the rule of law, not mob rule. Uphold the Constitution, not abandon its principles when it's convenient. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not what's in it for me. I stand for the Constitution and the rule of law, lower taxes and controlled spending, fixing the healthcare mess that the DFL left us with Minsher, stopping the decline of the education system, supporting roads and bridges and buses, lanes, not trains. Name's Frank Pafko. I'm the endorsed Republican candidate in 63B, and I would appreciate your vote. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all the candidates for participating this morning, and also thanking the audience members for your respectful attendance. And remind people to vote on November 6th. That's a Tuesday. And let's thank the candidates. Oh, wow. Yeah, we always just get a fraction of them. Well, that's good, though.